but as a source of invention history, it has a major problem. It mixes together at least 4 different categories without distinguishing them. I specifically looked for this information so I could see if I was wrong, and lo and behold, I ended up being right. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you are. So I've got an interesting one today. I ran across this thing on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And well, let me go ahead and just get right into this thing for you. This is apparently from the Black Inventions Museum. Yes, I did look it up. Yes, this is actually a real thing here in LA, California. Funny thing, most of this is not true. And really the thing that caught my eye is the Inventions here by George Washington Carver. Now, of course, that's not the very first thing. The very first thing, of course, is the very top here. Paper invented by the Africans. Chess invented by the Africans. The alphabet invented by the Africans. Now the funny thing is, paper actually goes back to China. Chess actually originally goes back to what's called, I believe it's Chaturanga, which is over in India. It was originally a military strategy game, but yeah, chess was not invented by the Africans. I don't understand why they would list chess as being created by Africans, but let's go ahead and continue because I want to go back to George Washington Carver. So go down there and look. George Washington Carver, the first thing that pops out, of course, everybody learns, I'm sure, in probably 2nd, 3rd, maybe 4th grade, that he invented peanut butter. Not true. George Washington Carver did not invent peanut butter. He invented many, many uses for peanuts, and the reason why is because as a farmer himself, he actually believed using peanuts as a rotational crop. So that's part of what prompted me to go ahead and make this video. I like to debunk information like this, especially when I see blatantly false crap. Now, I looked up a bunch of this information myself, but for ease of use, because there is a lot on here, I did go ahead and use the evil ChatGeppetto. That is ChatGPT for anybody who doesn't know. Spyro Floralopoulos, he calls it ChatGeppetto. So let's go ahead and hop over to that real quick. Now, I started with the first doorknob because that was another thing that I went ahead and looked up. Let's go ahead and read. No one knows for certain who invented the first doorknob. Common claim is that the inventor named Osborne Dorsey, who is the person who is listed on that paper, invented the first doorknob in 1878. However, that claim is misleading. He did receive the U.S. patent for it in 1878, but the patent was for an improvement to a door-holding device, not to the original invention of the doorknob itself. Doorknobs existed before this patent. In fact, doorknobs and related mechanisms were already in use by the early 1800s. That's over 80 years before this patent. And some historians point to the patents such as John Bakewell for glass doorknob mechanisms in the 1820s. The reason the inventor is unknown is because doors themselves are thousands of years old. Early doors were opened using latches, bars, rings, pulls, or leather straps. Knob-like handles evolved gradually over time rather than appearing as a single, clearly documented invention. So the most accurate answer is the first doorknob inventor is unknown. While Dorsey patented an important door-related improvement, and that is important to know because I do ask that question later on. In 1878, he did not invent the first doorknob. It is one of those everyday objects whose origins are older and murkier than most people realize. So there is an important distinction because I will ask difference between inventing something and making an improvement, because I have seen over the years, especially about black inventions, and one of them is also the traffic light. And an African-American, black man, whatever you want to, classify the person as, created the traffic light. That's not true. Traffic lights were something that already existed, and there is a gentleman who created, and I don't remember his name, but he created something that is more modern, but the traffic light already existed. So the next question that I asked is, when was paper first invented and who invented it? Paper was first invented in ancient China. Okay, traditionally the invention is credited to Kai Lun, a court official in the Eastern Han Dynasty around 105 CE. He developed a method of making paper from materials such as tree bark, hemp waste, old rags, fishing nets, created a writing material that was much cheaper and more practical than silk or bamboo slips. However, modern archaeology has complicated the story. Fragments of paper have been found in China dating back to the 2nd century BC, more than 200 years before his time. The short answer is the first known paper is in China around the 2nd century BC. Unknown inventor. Person who is traditionally created for inventing paper is Kai Lun around 105 CE. The most accurate modern view is that he revolutionized and popularized papermaking rather than being the very first person who invented it. So once again, another ding for the Black Inventors Museum. It's a bit like the doorknob question right here. The name we remember is often the person who perfected and spread an invention, not necessarily the first person who made one. Now let's move on to the chess. chess, because we started at the top. Now I'm skipping a little bit. Who created chess and when? The exact inventor of chess is unknown, but historians generally agree that chess originated in India around the 6th century CE. The earliest known ancestor of modern chess was a game called Chaturanga. I hope I'm saying that right. The name means 4 divisions of the military and referred to infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots, the units that eventually evolved into pawns, knights, bishops, and rooks. The development of chess is usually traced like this. Chaturanga in India, Shatranj, I hope I'm saying that right, in the Sasanian Empire, where the game spread to Persia, spread throughout the Islamic world after the Arab conquest of Persia, introduction to Europe around the 10th century, and then major rule changes in Europe during the 15th century create the modern game, including the powerful queen and bishop. And there we are. It has nothing to do with Africa. Now, the earliest written references to chess appear in Indian and Persian sources around the 6th and 7th centuries. A famous Persian text, I'm going to butcher this, and I'm sorry, the Karnamaki Ardashiri Abagan, references the game after it had arrived from India. And there we go. So if someone asks who invented chess, the most accurate answer is nobody knows the individual inventor. It likely evolved from earlier board games and emerged in India around the 6th century CE as Chaturanga. Now, who or what civilization created medicine? Now, this is going to lead into another big one, because something that you might have noticed is the first, I believe it's 5 entries, state Africans. And then after that, on that paper, it lists individual people. Medicine doesn't have a single inventor. It developed independently in several civilizations over thousands of years. And medicine is one of those things that paper credits Africans for. So the earliest known medical traditions include prehistoric peoples, tens of thousands of years ago, ancient Egypt, 3000 BC onward, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient India, with roots dating back more than 2,500 years, ancient China, ancient Greece, including Hippocrates around 460 to 370 BC. And he's often called the father of modern medicine. So nowhere in there does it state anything about Africa or Africans. You're asking who created modern scientific medicine, which is a different distinction. Many historians point to a long chain of contributions from figures such as Hippocrates, Galen, Ibn Sina, Andreas Vesalius, Louis Pasteur, and Alexander Fleming, rather than a single inventor. So the shortest accurate answer is no single person or civilization created medicine. It emerged independently in many cultures and evolved gradually as humans learned how to treat illness and injury. And that makes a lot of sense, because that's something that really can't be isolated to a single person or civilization. That's, obviously something you could say that the flu vaccine was developed by a person or one small group. But medicine overall doesn't make sense to try and attribute to one particular civilization or one group of people. Who created airplane propelling? And the reason why it's spelled like that is because that is exactly how it's spelled in that paper. If by airplane propelling you mean the invention of the airplane propeller, there isn't a single simple answer. Early screw propellers were developed for ships in the 1830s by inventors such as Francis Pettit Smith and John Ericsson. However, the first practical aircraft propeller is generally credited to Wilbur Wright and Orville Wright. In 1903, while building the Wright Flyer, they realized that existing marine propeller theory wasn't adequate for airplanes, and they developed their own aerodynamic theory and designed highly efficient wooden propellers that made powered flight possible. And remember, those two dudes from Kitty Hawk were bicycle makers, and they developed their own aerodynamic theory and made the first airplane. So they went from ship propellers in the 1830s to the practical airplane propeller from the Wright brothers. So if someone asks who created airplane propulsion using propellers, the most commonly accepted answer is the Wright brothers in 1903. Now here is where I start to actually ask it more questions. I'm asking because I've heard some claims that James S. Adams is the inventor of airplane propelling. I'm getting more direct with it. The claim you've heard is a good example of how a real patent can become exaggerated over time. James Sloan Adams did exist, and he received U.S. patent in 1920 for propelling means for airplanes. So that's 1920, a full 17 years after the Wright brothers. However, that patent does not make him the inventor of airplane propulsion, aircraft propellers, or powered flight. In fact, airplane propellers were already in widespread use long before 1920. The Wright brothers flew the first successful powered airplane in 1903 using propellers they designed themselves, 17 years before Adams' patent. Their propeller work is considered one of the key engineering breakthroughs that made powered flight practical. Adams' patent described an alternative propulsion concept using springs, moving resistance planes, and stored mechanical energy to help propel an aircraft rather than inventing the airplane propeller itself. In other words, he made an improvement on something that already existed. A key distinction. The modern list of African American inventors summarize Adams' contribution as airplane propelling means, which is accurate as the title of his patent. Over time, some social media posts have transformed that into claims that he invented the airplane propeller or invented airplane propulsion. Those stronger claims are not supported by the patent itself. A useful analogy would be this. If someone patents a new type of automobile transmission in 2020, that does not mean they invented the automobile. Likewise, Adams patented a method of propelling an airplane, not the general concept of airplane propulsion. So the historically accurate statement is Sloan Adams Adams was an inventor who patented an aircraft propulsion system in 1920, but did not invent the airplane propeller, powered flight, or airplane propulsion as a whole. The confusion likely comes from people reading the patent title Propelling Means for Airplanes and interpreting it as invented airplane propulsion rather than invented a particular propulsion mechanism for airplanes. Another one here. Who created the multi-stage rocket? It was not invented by a single modern engineer. The idea is surprisingly old. The earliest description comes from the 14th century China, a military text called the Huolongjing, attributed to Zhao Yu and Liu Ji, describes a, quote, fire dragon issuing from the water, end quote, essentially a rocket that carried and ignited smaller rockets after launch. And here we have some drawings. Very interesting, actually. However, the modern scientific concept of multi-stage rockets was developed much later. You have, I think that's Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, mathematically demonstrated the advantages of staging for reaching space. You have Robert Goddard, conducted pioneering liquid fuel rocket research and proposed practical staging concepts. And then engineers, so that'd be a team led by Werner von Braun, designed large multi-stage rockets such as the Saturn V that carried humans to the moon. But the answer depends on what you mean. Earliest known multi-stage rocket concept, modern scientific theory, or the first practical large-stage space launch multi-stage rockets. Like paper, medicine, and chess, the multi-stage rocket is best understood as an idea that evolved over centuries rather than creation of a single inventor. Now here we are. Then why would the Black Invention Museum credit Adolf Shams, I believe that's Shams, not Shams, with this invention? The most likely answer is that the museum is using a very broad definition of invented, one that credits a person for a specific patented improvement or design rather than originating the entire technology. This is actually a pattern you've already noticed with the examples of James S. Adams and airplane propulsion. There are generally 3 levels of attribution: invented a concept, invented a specific implementation or improvement, received a patent related to the technology. Without seeing the museum's specific source patent number or exhibit text, can't verify exactly what they are referring to. What I can say is the multi-stage rocket predates the 20th century by hundreds of years. So if Shams is being credited as the inventor of the multi-stage rocket itself, that claim would conflict with the historical record. If, however, he patented a particular multi-stage rocket design or improvement, the museum may be using a simplified description of his contribution. However, that would also be, I want to say, a lie. One thing I've found when examining inventor lists from many organizations, not just Black history organizations, is that they sometimes compress patented a new version of X into invented X. Those are not always the same thing. If you could provide the exact exhibit text, patent number, or link to the Black Invention Museum page mentioning him, I can help trace the claim, determine whether it refers to specific patent, particular rocket design, or an inaccurate attribution. So then I ask, so there is a key difference between actually inventing something and making an improvement, even if there is a significant improvement. Now, of course, I already know this. I'm just putting it in for the AI. Yes, there is a very important distinction. In both history and patent law, inventing something for the first time and improving an existing invention are very different achievements, even when the improvement is revolutionary. For example, the inventor of the first practical telephone is generally credited as Alexander Graham Bell. Countless engineers since then have dramatically improved telephones, adding touch-tone dialing, cellular networks, smartphones, and more. The creators of smartphones made enormous advances, but they are not usually credited with inventing the telephone itself. Similarly, the Wright brothers are credited with the first successful powered airplane. Later engineers created jet engines, swept wings, fly-by-wire controls, and composite airframes. Those innovations transformed aviation, but they did not make the inventors of the airplane. In patent law, this distinction is explicit. A patent can be granted for a completely new invention, a new process, a new machine, or an improvement to an existing invention. Patent on an improvement is still a genuine invention in the legal sense, but it does not erase prior inventors' contributions. A useful analogy is, inventing the wheel is one achievement, inventing the pneumatic tire is another. The tire may be a huge improvement, but it doesn't make its inventor the inventor of the wheel. Where things get messy is that museums, textbooks, websites, and social media often simplify language. A display might say, John Doe invented the automatic transmission, when the underlying patent was actually for an improved automatic transmission control system. That shorthand can unintentionally create the impression that the person originated the entire technology. So basically what it comes down to is human beings shortening things for usefulness, but that ends up muddying the waters. Now, whether that's intentional or not, can't really attribute, the cause. So when evaluating claims such as invented the doorknob, invented airplane propulsion, invented the multi-stage rocket, it's worth asking, was this the first known example of the technology? Was it a new version or improvement? Was it simply a patent related to the technology? These questions often reveal whether the claim is literally true, partially true, or a simplified summary of a more specific contribution. And here I paste that. Analyze this and tell me if there is any invention that is attributed to a person on the list that is genuinely invented by the person, not just an improvement on an existing invention. This poster is a fascinating historical document, but as a source of invention history, it has a major problem. It mixes together at least 4 different categories without distinguishing them. 1. Things invented in antiquity: paper, chess, alphabet, medicine, civilization. 2. original inventions. 3. Significant improvements to existing inventions. And 4. Patents related to existing technologies. Because those categories are blended, many entries are historically inaccurate if read as "this person invented this thing." For example, on the poster, paper Africans, chess Africans, alphabet Africans, medicine Africans, civilization Africans, airplane propelling, doorknob, multi-stage rocket. None of those claims hold up if interpreted as first inventor. Examples that are much closer to genuine inventions. Several people in the list are legitimately associated with inventions that were either entirely new devices or very close to being original inventions. Jan Matzeliger, the shoe lasting machine. This is one of the strongest entries. Jan Matzeliger revolutionized shoe manufacturing with an automatic shoe lasting machine. There were earlier methods of lasting shoes, but Matzeliger's machine was so different and transformative that historians generally credit him as the inventor of the practical automatic lasting machine. Now, the verdict is mostly legitimate. It doesn't mean completely, but it is mostly. And the difference here is there were earlier methods, but the machine was so different and transformative that historians generally credit him as the inventor of the first practical automatic lasting machine. Garrett Morgan, the traffic signal. This one is mixed. Traffic signals existed before Morgan. This is the gentleman I was talking about earlier. However, Morgan patented a distinctive 3-position traffic signal that addressed specific safety problems. Verdict: he invented an important traffic signal design, not traffic signals themselves. And that's where the distinction lies with him. Traffic signals were already invented, but he created a different one. So that's why he got a patent for it. But he still didn't invent the traffic signal. Again with Garrett Morgan. The gas mask. Gas mask existed before he invented it. However, he invented a specific safety hood design. Now this one was an improvement/specialized invention, but not the first gas mask. Lydia Newman and the hairbrush. Hairbrushes existed for thousands of years, of course. However, Newman patented an improved hairbrush design, so this one was an improvement. Alexander Miles and the elevator. Elevators, of course, existed long before Miles. However, his contribution was an improved automatic elevator door mechanism. One is an improvement, not a new creation. And here we go. George Washington Carver and peanut butter. One of the most famous myths. He did not invent peanut butter. It existed far before him. Otis Boykin. Pacemaker controls. Pacemakers existed before Boykin. However, he invented highly reliable electric resistors used in pacemakers and other electronics. This was a major improvement. Charles Drew. Blood plasma. Blood plasma existed naturally. Drew pioneered large-scale storage and transfusion techniques. This was a scientific breakthrough, but not the invention of plasma itself. That's a really weird claim. I actually had missed that one on the poster, so I'm really glad that ChatGPT found this one. Now, the people on the poster who genuinely created new things. For making a list of entries, the strongest candidates were yes, this person genuinely invented something new rather than merely improving an existing thing. I would include Jan Matzeliger, Grenville T. Woods for some of his railway communication systems, although not every item listed. Lonnie Johnson for the Super Soaker, which was a genuinely new commercial product. And the Super Soaker is awesome. I loved it when I was younger. I love them now because I got kids and they're just awesome. Joseph N. Jackson, depending on the specific patent being referenced. So that's the same as Grenville. Not every item listed. And Norbert, I believe that's really you. I'm not French, and it looks like a French name, so sorry if I butchered it, for his multiple effect vapor system used in sugar refining. And look at that. These are much stronger claims than invented paper or invented chess. The biggest red flag on the poster. The biggest clue that the poster is not applying a consistent standard is the very first 5 entries. Paper, chess, alphabet, medicine, civilization. Those are all developments that emerged over centuries, and in some cases millennia, through the contributions of entire cultures. Once a source is willing to assign a single inventor or ethnic group to something like civilization or medicine, it suggests that the poster is intended more as a celebration of contributions than as a rigorously sourced history of invention. Doesn't mean every name on it is wrong. Many of the inventors listed made real, important contributions and held legitimate patents. It does mean that each claim has to be checked individually because the poster clearly does not distinguish between invented the thing and invented a version of the thing and improved the thing. Those distinctions matter a lot when evaluating historical claims. And that really is the purpose of this video. It's not necessarily that the Black Inventions Museum is entirely wrong. It's more, don't automatically assume that because this is up there that clearly these people had to have invented it. What it means is it could be interesting, but you should actually look and see, what did they actually make these things? Especially because George Washington Carver, as we've all probably been taught, especially me, he didn't invent peanut butter. I actually did not learn that he invented peanut butter. I was not taught he was. I was taught that he created uses for peanuts. It's only when I was working in the school system many years ago that I first heard that he invented peanut butter, and I knew that wasn't true. So I had prior knowledge. I also have a naturally inquisitive mind, and I like seeking out the truth. And it's part of the reason why I made this channel to begin with. I speak my mind about certain topics. I speak my mind about any topic, really. And this is just one of those things. So don't automatically believe anything. Don't automatically believe everything. Definitely go and research things. If you go and Google, don't just look at the first few entries. Dig a little deeper, because things might not necessarily be just what they look like. Always look for the evidence against what you are looking for. Because if you only find what you are looking for, then you have fallen into the trap of confirmation bias. I specifically looked for this information so I could see if I was wrong. And lo and behold, I ended up being right. But some of the information here proved me wrong. I'm glad to find out that, hey, some of these things were right. When I first found out about Morgan, oh, that was interesting. He did actually create the traffic signal. Now, I actually found about that gentleman years ago, but that was very interesting to find out. I had no idea that he had created an improved traffic signal. I also didn't know that he had created the specialized hood for the gas mask. And again, that was years ago that I found that out, but that was really interesting. But anyway, that's all I got to say about that for today. If you guys could, please make sure to give me a like, subscribe, share the channel. Thank you. Have a great day.